Turks, David Sirota, the uprising is in town.
It has risen.
And that's right. John Idaho also here, whatever.
Yeah, I rose too, damn it. Got up for this shit.
So this is a fun show in a couple different regards. One, format-wise, we're doing fun little power panels throughout the week. David's in town, we're doing this in the first hour. Jordan Chariton is here, he's gonna be in the second hour. We've decided, let's go nuts, let's do mainly political stories for both hours for the next couple of days. Although, God, there was a story about tracking your sex toys. There's apparently smart sex toys. I'm used to the dumb ones, but and they are actually even tracking those, and I don't know if Obama's taking pictures through them. But anyway, that story, unfortunately, we won't get to today, even though that's super fun.
Don't worry, we're keeping our eyes on it though, okay? We're not gonna let this one
slide by.
Yeah.
Okay, and I know we keep going in and out of that story, but we'll get to it another day.
Christ.
Okay, anyways, now the other reason why this show is fun, interesting, is there are several stories in this lineup that are fascinating. They are super fascinating. The Breitbart story of of shivving Paul Ryan is madness. It's an amazing story. So we're gonna get to that soon. And then the Fukushima story in the second hour. Unbelievable, you literally won't believe the facts that are coming out of that.
I can't believe I got it on the rundown.
Yeah, well look guys, every once in a while I promise you something like this, somebody will have a reaction of like, no. And I deliver, don't I? When we tell you the Fukushima story, including the radioactive bores, but that's like the least interesting part of the story. You're gonna be like, no, that's unbelievable. So that's in the second hour, and then the Jared Kushner deal with China. Oh, that stinks to speaking of hog heaven, no, high heaven.
Radioactive hog heaven.
That's right. So hell of a lot to get to, including a fun poll in the show. All right, so having said that, David, welcome. John, go forward.
Okay, but we are going to be starting off with another lightning round. A few stories I wanted to make sure we got to. As you probably know, especially if you're on the East Coast, there is a winter storm Stella, which apparently, as is often the case, not as bad as people thought it was going to be. Of course, they have to err on the side of caution because people's lives are at stake. So it wasn't as bad as they thought, but there are still millions of people up and down the East Coast that are on blizzard warning right now, and between 8,000 and 9,000 flights have already been canceled as of earlier today. So that is something that is still very much a reality if you're living on the East Coast. A little bit of good news for you, 6 European countries are coming together in a multi-billion-dollar project to create a massive artificial island and a wind farm of thousands of turbines that's going to be positioned in the middle of basically the sea bordering all of those countries. It is going to provide enough power for 80 million people in those 6 countries, which I find, in seeing where our climate policy and energy policy is going in this country and where it will likely to go for 4 to 8 years, that is such an inspiration that 6 countries can come together that way.
Well, it does seem like a bit of a windfall for those countries. Okay, in all seriousness, we're gonna let them beat us like that? America should be #1 in sustainable energy, okay? So I'm looking at you, America. Do you have what it takes to be #1 in sustainable energy? Or are you gonna let the Norway beat us? Norway? Norway or our way? I say our way.
In the Netherlands right now, they're saying, we're getting beaten by the US on clean coal. They've got cleaner coal than us. Probably not.
Let them beat us on that, that's okay.
Exactly, that would be okay. At George Washington University, they're currently investigating white supremacist flyers that have been left around the campus targeting undocumented immigrants with such phrases as "America is a white nation" with a couple of very white faces, and quote, "We have a right to exist." And so obviously there's free speech, but people are a little bit concerned about it, and so they are looking into that in George Washington University right now.
Can I say, there's nobody more obsessed with sex than white supremacists. Because they're always like, we have a right to exist. Well, who's stopping you, dude? Who's trying to kill you? Nobody, right? What they mean by that is like, please, our white women stop having sex with minorities instead of us.
You think it's we have a right to get laid?
That's exactly what it is.
And by the way, they are the same people who are constantly focused on cuckoldry. Oh God, somebody might come for our wives. That's not a healthy worldview, people. Okay.
There might be another reason why they think about cuckolding every single day. Anyway.
There might be. Okay, Sean Spicer once again earlier today at the White House press briefing declined an opportunity that was given to him to condemn the remarks of Steve King, his quote, other people's babies racist comments. Yesterday he said they're gonna wait and see what happens and let people sort of say what they really meant. In the interim, Steve King said, I meant what I said. And now the White House is like, no, we apparently don't have any problem with it.
Yeah.
And finally, for the first time since 2012, Somali pirates have hijacked a commercial ship. This one, the Aris 13 of Sri Lanka. There had actually been 4 years with no pirate successful hijackings. And that is currently ongoing. Security forces have been dispatched to the region to retake the ship and rescue its crew.
The pirates are ascendant, whether it is the pirate party in Iceland that has almost taken over the country, the whole country, not just the ship, but they're a legitimate party over there, or the literal pirates that are back from Somalia. And it might be related to another larger story we're gonna do in the show today, which is about the famine in Somalia, thereby driving people to desperation. But either way, two things are on the rise, white supremacists and pirates. If we could only get them to fight, I think that'd be kind of badass, and I have a good sense of who would win.
That sounds like the next season of Game of Thrones.
Oh yes.
Oh yeah, that's true. But yeah, it's amazing that there can be these huge shifts that you just never hear about. Like we talked about how the teen arrest rate is 1/3 of what it was just 10 years ago for both general crime and violent crime as well. I don't think anybody would have guessed that or thought based on the news they're seeing that was going on. And then also that in a 5-year span, we went from several hundred attempted or successful Somali pirate attacks down to less than 10. And I had no idea, and I saw Captain Phillips. They didn't even mention it at the end of that.
I think it was largely Tom Hanks.
It's largely, there's too much heat right now thanks to Oscar season. We're gonna back off for a few years. But hopefully they're able to retake the ship. Okay, with that, why don't we turn to some of the biggest domestic political stories of the day. The GOP was quick to criticize the CBO report on the likely effects, both in terms of loss of coverage and also the financial impacts of the repeal and replacement of the Affordable Care Act. And they were saying that it was political and inaccurate, it had flawed assumptions, you couldn't trust it, and who trusts that guy that's running the CBO? What was he? Well, he was actually appointed by a Republican. Well, whatever, you still can't trust him. And those arguments, unfortunately for them, were undercut later on in the day when a White House report of the likely effects actually turned out to be more critical, harsher than the CBOs, and we're gonna give you that information now. The analysis found that under the Affordable Health Care Act, the American Health Care Act, the coverage losses would include 17 million for Medicaid, 6 million in the individual market, and 3 million in employer-based plans over the course of 10 years. If you add those up, that's actually a couple of million more people than the CBO thought would eventually lose out on access to health insurance. And again, that is the White House analysis coming out of the Office of Management and Budget.
Okay, so a quick note on that. As John alluded to, the guy who runs the CBO is a conservative economist that was approved, sanctioned by Price, who's now the head of Health and Human Services for the Trump administration.
Yeah.
So oops, when they say that it's biased or it's unreliable, they're talking about their own guy. Now, speaking of their own guy, the guy who runs OMB that came up with the analysis that says, no, not 24 million people losing insurance, 26 million people losing insurance. That's Mick Mulvaney. That's Trump's main guy that John's gonna tell you right now is going like, oh no, everything's gonna be fine. It's your office that said it's gonna be worse than even the CBO said it was.
Exactly. Yeah, and one of the reasons that they chose this guy to head it up is that he is a big fan of dynamic scoring, which we've talked about. This idea that when we're trying to figure out the likely economic impacts of a law, you tell us what you think what effect it's going to have on the economy, and we'll factor those in. If you say that a tax cut is going to generate economic activity, even if everything we've seen in the past 50 years tells us opposite, we will pretend that that's going to happen and make the numbers look better for you. But even with that, it's an absolute disaster of a law, and that's the guy that they're now criticizing. So by the way, as a final result of this, coming from that report out of the White House, which by the way was shared with Politico and they made the information public, there will be a total of 54 million individuals in 2026 that are uninsured at that point, nearly double what would be projected under current law. But as Cenk pointed out, Mick Mulvaney is responding to this. We're gonna have his video in just a second. Now, the White House Communications Director Michael Dubke said that the information we're talking about right now is, quote, not an analysis of the bill in any way whatsoever. It is simply us trying to predict what the CBO is going to say using the CBO's methodology. But that's interesting because the Brookings Institute just a week or two ago also attempted to predict it and had a far lower number. And they're not in their analysis saying we're using their methodology and here is why that methodology is flawed, okay? They're not making that case, they're simply asserting that it's flawed. They're not explaining why we should believe that. But again, let's go to Mick Mulvaney, and here is his continuing criticism of the CBO.
And what is your take on the CBO scoring?
Good morning from Washington, where according to the CBO, it's sunny and 75 degrees this morning. It's too easy. What is our take on the report? Is exactly what we expected to see. I was surprised to hear the word damage control used so many times in that previous report. That's just not right. This is exactly what we thought the CBO would come forth with. They're terrible at counting coverage. The CBO report is full of errors, not errors, they're just bad assumptions like that. It's the only way you can get to these bizarre numbers.
Now, as we pointed out, there are bad assumptions, but it's not the ones that he disagrees with.
Have you noticed one of the weird points about this is that they're saying that the CBO overestimated how many people would be covered by the exchanges in Obamacare. So their first criticism was CBO is too rosy about how much coverage Obamacare will create. And now they're saying CBO is overestimating how many people will lose coverage. So my question for them is sort of like, well, does CBO estimate too much coverage or too little coverage? Like you just spent a long time saying CBO was too rosy in how much Obamacare would cover, and now you're saying it's overestimating how many people will lose coverage. So it's like the opposite arguments that they're making.
So if you were talking about an economic analysis, people would ask that question and go, hey, let's talk about the assumptions that Mulvaney just mentioned. What economic assumptions did you make? And if you made the same ones, then it would be, then actually the logical conclusion is there's actually going to be even more uninsured people than they're estimating. But that is not who they're trying to appeal to. They're trying to appeal to Trump voters on a political level and go, oh yeah, CBO, the Obama guys. Even though it's actually a conservative approved by the Republicans, oh yeah, they're gonna cheat in favor of Obama. Well, can you show us how they would do that? Like, what would you change in the assumptions? Now, luckily, they have their own Office of Management and Budget, the OMB that guy Mulvaney runs. Now, let's break down whether it really was an estimate of what the CBO would come out with or their own estimate. Because they now say, no, we were just trying to estimate. So, number one, Politico has the documents themselves and they say, no, it was an analysis intended to actually assess the coverage and spending outcomes. So, not true, they have the documents. Okay, but even so, logically, even if you're like, everything is fake news to you because you're a Trump supporter, right? Okay, now how stupid are they politically that their own guy puts out a report that's even worse? Like, wouldn't you think like, oh, if we estimated the CBO is gonna come out with a disastrous thing saying we're gonna throw 24 million people to the wolves and they have no insurance. Politically, wouldn't your own guy come out and go, oh no, it's actually 4 million or negative 4 million, we're going to add people. No, instead he's like, oh yeah, it's gonna be 26 million. No, you know why? Because they actually did the analysis and it came out to 26 million.
Yeah.
That's why you would never do this politically because it's not advantageous to you. It makes no sense at all.
Unless you believe the ridiculous things they say about what this bill is going to do. If you actually believe that it won't have a bad impact, if you're Donald Trump and you think that healthcare is just way more complicated than people thought and I have great ideas, I genuinely believe them, go show me that I'm right, and then lo and behold, it turns out that the numbers are actually far worse for them. That's one possible explanation. But now that stuff is out there, that OMB report is out there, and so Mick Mulvaney is now being asked about it, and here is his attempted evasion.
Your own estimate when you were getting ready for the CBO, and it was more than the CBO came up with in terms of how many people would be uninsured.
One of the differences between the Office of Management and Budget, which I know fairly well by now, and the CBO, is that we admit we don't know how to count coverage. The OMB does not count coverage. But there is no OMB report that says it's worse than the CBO report. We simply don't have the ability to do that.
Does that document exist, and is that what you were doing with it?
I don't know if the document exists because I haven't seen it.
You are the head of OMB. Do you know whether or not this document exists? Because it is supposedly an OMB document that was reviewed by Politico. Because Sean Spicer is saying it's fake, it's false, it's not real.
I don't know if there is an OMB document or not. I have not seen one. I did not ask for one to be done. It's possible it could have been done under the previous administration. I have no idea.
How would the previous administration have done an analysis of a plan they didn't know about yet?
They did, as a matter of fact. Back in January, I think it was Nancy Pelosi.
Oh, you mean in January, not back during the Obama administration. You're saying before you got there.
There was a CBO report out in January that scored repeal with no replace.
Right.
And it showed 20 million of people uncovered and so forth. But no one was offering a repeal with no replace bill at that particular time. It may be that document is the foundation of the document you mentioned.
All right.
Okay, that was a great follow-up by Chris Cuomo, which doesn't happen often in cable news. And his answer actually makes no sense. I'm impressed that he actually came up with an answer. But he's saying, oh yeah, it might have been this other thing where we repealed it but didn't replace it. No, the OMB document scores this current Republican plan, which clearly did not exist when Obama was in charge. They are desperate to blame everything on Obama, no matter what. Our plan that we just came up with last week, Obama's fault.
The summary of what he said was, we don't know shit, and I don't know shit. Yeah. I mean, like literally, he was like, we don't count how many people will be covered, and I don't even know if this document is real. I mean, I guess their talking point now is we don't know anything.
We don't know anything. Yeah, we didn't come up with any numbers, and if we had, we don't know how to.
No, but that goes towards the two things that we talk about all the time. One is the incompetence of the Trump administration. You're the head of the OMB, how could you, and it's in the news today, you're about to go on CNN. There's a giant news story about how you guys said there's 26 million people who are gonna be uninsured. How could you not know if that document exists or doesn't exist?
That's why you're going on CNN. They don't just check in every morning with Mick Mulvaney.
Right, how could you, okay, so either he's lying, and if you're a Trump supporter, you get it. Either he's lying, or boy, that is incredible incompetence, right? And then secondarily, it's the Republicans' disdain for actually governing. So he says, OMB can't do anything. Well, who's in charge of the OMB? I am. So you're just saying, I don't want to govern. I don't want to run the government. I'm in charge of this department, which is incredibly important in other administrations. And I'm telling you, we can't figure out anything. Forget it, I'm not even going to do my job.
Yeah.
Amazing.
They're being honest. But there is another spin on this that I want to turn to. Another one of the defenses that the GOP is currently using against the fairly disastrous CBO estimate of the effects of their new healthcare bill is that this is simply phase one, step one in a three-part plan, and you can't understand the actual effect of the bill until we get all three parts. And so here you're gonna see both Tom Price and Paul Ryan rolling out this new talking point.
So what the report looked at was only 1/3 of our plan, and that's why you can't look at this in isolation. Oh, but that's not the whole plan. That's the problem.
They also ignored completely the other legislative activities that we'll be putting into place that will make certain that we have an insurance market that actually works.
If you look at our entire package that the CBO didn't look at, not because they're bad folks, that's the way the rules work. They didn't look at all the regulations that we believe ought to go away. They didn't look at purchase across state lines or medical malpractice reform or all those things that in their totality create a system that actually works better.
This is just part one of a three-part plan, and that's why I'm excited. Just this, they say, lowers premiums, stabilizes the market, gives people more choice and freedom. Part two is Tom Price at HHS brings more choice and competition, lets the states open up markets, which will lower prices even more. In part three are the other bills that we will be passing: interstate shopping across state lines, association healthcare plans to let people bulk buy insurance nationwide, medical liability reforms. What I'm encouraged is, once our reforms kick in, what the CBO is telling us is it's going to lower premiums. It will lower premiums 10%. It stabilizes the market.
You don't want to be in a spot where you're talking about how, hey, premiums are going down, a voiceover to an image showing a huge sum of people are about to lose access to health insurance. On Fox News, yeah. And by the way, they did lead in their first segment about the CBO. It was, new CBO report, deficit will be reduced by $366 billion. That was the most important takeaway from that report.
By the way, Obamacare reduced deficit by about the same number, and what did they do? Oh my God, it's terrible, it's disastrous. Nobody was bragging about how it reduces deficit back when Obama did it. Okay, now to this talking point. Where did that come from? Nice little rabbit they just pulled out of a hat. I don't remember when they did the big launch. You remember in the press conference talking about three-part Monty and all the three different steps they were going to do?
No.
I don't remember that. All of a sudden, oh yeah, this part might suck, but we have 2 other secret parts, and those parts are going to be awesome.
It's like you gave someone a gift and you see the look on their face and they're like, but that's just the first gift. I have other ones coming. Yeah. Now, not everyone is buying this, and I don't just mean people sitting at this table right here. An up-and-coming Republican also not accepting this talking point. Here is Tom Cotton on with Hugh Hewitt.
What can be done? I've talked to the speaker, I've talked to the leader, I've talked to Kathy McMorris Rogers is on today, Mick Mulvaney, Tom Price. They all say it's a 3-step dance because of the Senate reconciliation rules. So you know those rules. Working within the rules, how can the Senate improve its bills, or how can the House send to the Senate a bill that fits within the guardrails of reconciliation and allows for 51 votes that improves the individual market?
Hugh, there is no 3-phase process. There is no 3-step plan. That is just political talk. It's just politicians engaging in spin. This is why. Step 1 is a bill that can pass with 51 votes in the Senate. That's what we're working on right now. Step 2, as yet unwritten regulations by Tom Price, which is going to be subject to court challenge and therefore perhaps the whims of the most liberal judge in America. But step 3, some mythical legislation in the future that is going to garner Democratic support and help us get over 60 votes in the Senate. If we had those Democratic votes, we wouldn't need 3 steps. We would just be doing that right now on this legislation altogether. That's why it's so important that we get this legislation right, because there is no step 3, and step 2 is not completely under our control.
So that's one of the most amazing things I've heard. And there's a couple of reasons why. Number one, that is a very conservative Republican who is very much controlled by the big donors. He's one of the biggest favorites of the big donors. And he just put a hatchet in the back of this plan. He's like, oh, your healthcare plan backed by Paul Ryan, Donald Trump, whatever. Bam! Like, oh, sink the long gone. Now, like, they got no chance of passing it in the Senate after Tom Cotton said that. The second reason why it's super surprising is because it was one of the most honest things I've ever heard from a Republican.
Yeah.
Where he's like, wait, if we had a mythical legislation that could pass the Senate and have the Democrats support it, why didn't we release it in the beginning? Because of course we don't have one. That's very true. So what in the world is going on here? Why have the donors, because that's all Tom Cotton does. He's one of the top guys that represents the donors in the Senate. Why have the donors sent out Tom Cotton to bury this plan? It is really interesting.
Well, but I think part of it may be, and this is the part I can't figure out about the healthcare debate, it may be that it's not clear where the insurance industry is. If you're the insurance industry, there are things about Obamacare you don't like, there are things about Obamacare you do like.
Yeah.
You don't like the prohibition about throwing sick people off coverage because of a pre-existing condition. You don't like that. You do like the mandate. You actually do like more people having to or deciding to buy your products. So it's never been clear to me who the Republicans, at least initially, think in the donor class that they are serving. Because this isn't necessarily great. A repeal is not necessarily great for the insurance industry. Now, maybe the theory is that once we dismantle Obamacare, we take away the prohibitions, we deregulate the insurance market even more, so that there's this, they call it insurance across state lines. And I think that sounds really great, right? It's insurance across state lines. Why can't the insurer? I live in Colorado. Why can't the insurer in Utah provide insurance to me in Colorado? Because the regulations exist, because what would end up happening is all the insurers would go to the most unregulated state possible, like a place like South Dakota or something like that, to provide the worst cover. They would all centralize there. So maybe the Republican theory is sort of a 2-step plan where we get rid of Obamacare, all the good things that people like in Obamacare, in order to get to a situation in which the insurance industry has even more unbridled control over the insurance market. But the interim step between there isn't necessarily great for the insurance industry or the American public.
Yeah.
No, this is weird. Normally, the Republicans don't do anything without the blessing of their giant donors. And here you've got a very significant Republican split between Paul Ryan, who also is basically a water boy for the donors, and Tom Cotton. So maybe it's two different sets of donors.
Like, or look, it could be that people like Tom Cotton are legitimately afraid politically of actually throwing millions of people off of insurance.
That's true.
I mean,
and he's not the only
these people do come up for election. I'm not saying they don't want to serve their donors, but they're caught between.
I have never seen them care about voters this far out from election in my life. You see what I'm saying? Because at the end of the election cycle, what do? They just inundate you with ads paid for by their donors, and they don't concentrate on any of this. They usually, I mean, they're ready to do those giant tax cuts, which are terrible to voters, Jay, for the rich, etc.
People know if they used to have insurance and now they don't. That's an easy transfer to. Oh yeah, remember when I had access to health care?
My question about the Democrats is, you've had Donald Trump, who has said in the past he supports a single-payer health care, much like Medicare, is that where are the Democrats saying, okay, you want to repeal Obamacare, you want to replace Obamacare?
Yes!
Here's the most popular program in American history. Why don't we just have a one-page bill, a one-line bill that reduces the Medicare eligibility age to 0?
Yeah.
Okay, so
and Bernie is pushing for that in town halls on MSNBC every week now.
So that's what I wanted to focus on at the end too. So this is a great point by David. So they have complete dissension within the Republican Party now. I mean, Trump is now attacking Paul Ryan. We'll explain that in a different story. Tom Cotton is attacking Ryan. They're all attacking each other. So and they don't have any good ideas, and they can't figure out how to make this thing work because some of the more centrist Republicans go, no, you're going to throw all these people off of insurance and I'm going to get killed in the next election, to your guys' point, right? And the conservative Republicans are going, no, I want even more for my donors. This is not draconian enough, right? So in the middle of this mess, Democratic Party, you might want to listen to Bernie Sanders. What could be a stroke of genius is to go, hey, lucky for the American people, we do have a repeal of Obamacare. What? Because every once in a while, a news anchor that got their talking points from the RNC says, how come the Democrats don't have an alternative? Well, first of all, they do. It's called Obamacare. Okay, but second of all,
they even have alternatives to that.
They have an alternative to Obamacare. It's single payer or Medicare for all. It's such a simple idea. We already have Medicare. We just extend it to everybody, as David just said. Problem solved. And by the way, Medicare also has the extra advantage of being the second most popular program in America. Social Security is number one, Medicare is number two, with about a 3/4 popularity, 75%. Have you ever seen anything with a 75% popularity rating? Certainly not Trump or Clinton or any other politician. So Democrats, wakey, wakey, Medicare for all right now.
Except the failure of them to do that so far. And because you didn't mention one other point, which is that Medicare is a Democratic program, right? A big D Democratic Party program. So very popular, a Democratic Party legacy program, a solution basically that the rest of the industrialized world has adopted. So then the next question is, well, if you're not willing to do that, why are you not willing to offer that up?
We should look into find out if Democrats have ever gotten any money, campaign donations from health insurance companies.
I wonder.
Look into it.
Or the drug companies. I wonder if they've ever gotten money.
It's possible.
It is possible.
Yeah.
And if you remember, this came up during the Obamacare debate. They were going to lower there was a proposal out there to lower the Medicare age, eligibility age to 55. And if you remember, the person who led the charge, this was when Democrats had 60 votes, it was Joe Lieberman.
Led the charge against
that and ended up killing that.
And so finally, what the Republicans are having trouble with is, well, you can't get all these things at once. How can you lower premiums, cover everybody, and lower the deficit all at the same time? There's actually only one proposal that does that. Medicare for all. And it's amazing. It's amazing. By the way, you're thinking, no, if you're an independent or you never covered this issue before, never thought about it, or you're a Trump supporter or whatever, you're thinking, no, you guys are crazy. There's no magic bullet like that. How could it possibly do that? One of the ways that it does that is it takes out the middleman. The health insurance companies make billions upon billions, hundreds of billions, maybe trillions of dollars at being the middleman. So once you take that amount of money away and then you provide the health insurance directly, oh, voila, look at that.
It can't be done like every other country, industrialized country in the world does it. It can't be done even though every other country in the world does it.
The final thing I would say, and this is a topic for another story, but when we talk about how to fix like the cost of healthcare in this country and how we improve access to it, and I wish that we had time to run that video about access from Tom Price. We focus on the end step. A person is already sick and needs care. We should think about the possibility of looking into bills that try to stop that from happening in the first place. You know, if our massive food companies didn't have so much control stopping necessary regulations from being put into place decades ago, people wouldn't have the sort of pervasive chronic conditions that make our healthcare so expensive in this country.
Oh man, you're speaking my language. I've always wondered, here's a thing I've always wondered. I've always wondered why the insurance companies, the health insurance companies, are not more of a lobbying force on bills like the Farm Bill that create food policy. I mean, that's a whole, you can write a whole book on the connection between all these other things.
Yeah.
But the actual health insurance industry has an incentive to do that, and it has never been really all that much involved in that, and you're totally right. Other countries, they don't just have single payer healthcare systems, they have all sorts of other food policies.
Transparency on what's in the food, the effects of it.
Exactly, so that the cost doesn't spike at the end of healthcare where people are already sick.
Yes, they stop people from getting sick in the first place, but we don't even talk about that in this country.
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna take a quick break here. When we come back, that dramatic Breitbart story that I was telling you about, the Trump guys go after Paul Ryan in one of the most vicious ways I have ever seen. And it's almost inexplicable, but we're gonna try to explain it. We're gonna try to break it down and figure out, in the words of Donald Trump, what the hell is going on? When we return.
All right, post game here in Studio B. It's a green screen magic of internet television.
A lot of condom breaking stories.
Any conversation that starts with marriage is an interesting thing deserves a little bit of.
When the kid cries, perhaps that's that is an opportunity to do some. It's an opportunity to do some parenting.
Yeah, parenting is you cry, you're gone.
Oh my God.
I love that video.
Yeah, Ben, I got a great achoo. You're like, my mouth was open. She sneezed in my eye.
I used to have Donut Tower next to my desk.
Yeah, I'll dress up like a girl.
I sound confident now, Anna. Yeah. When we're off the air, I'm gonna be like, how is this gonna work?
When you get literally asked why 21 straight times.
Yeah.
And like at some point you're like, you're fucking with me now, right?
So I dumped the kids off at her mom's and I drove down to La Jolla for a day.
Get out, kids.
They're like, but daddy, no.
Why? What do you mean why? You asked me to look at you. You did it. You brought it up. You know you're doing it. What do you mean why? I don't know why. I was reading. She's lovely. Here's what's different. Like, it is a different feeling. Everybody says this, but it's 5:11 when we're shooting this. I can't wait to go home. Like that, I can't wait to see her.
What you guys do is allow us to be open and honest, and we don't have to worry about censorship, and we don't have to worry about sponsors telling us what we can and can't say. We're accountable by our audience and our audience only, and I absolutely love that. That's the best part about being a member. We love you guys.
All right, back on the Young Turks, David Sirota from International Business Times, where he's the senior editor for investigations. Watch out, Sirota will investigate.
I'm coming for you.
So in fact, Ruth Benedict says, is that David Sirota on the Young Turks? Happy days indeed. Okay, Mara QT writes in, Johnny Pie on TYT Live on Pie Day. Of course. Mara, you're not alone. Kim Horcher of Nerd Alert made the same observation earlier in the day about how it's Pie Day, and I think later you're going to eat some sort of pie with somebody.
No, but
is it International Pie Day?
It is.
Like
3.14,
yeah.
Pie like the number.
Yeah, the number.
Not like eating pie.
No,
Not like because it's March 14th.
No, but that's the true American version.
Right.
Got it.
Later, Sirota will investigate this so-called Pie Day.
Yes, so-called, and the money behind it.
I hear there's $3.14 million put into it. And who's getting a piece of that pie? Okay. Dan Campbell, oh, look at this. I made this stand up. I have a new gigantic iPad. Dan Campbell writes in, this Republican plan is just the first step. The next steps don't matter when the first step is off of the top of a cliff. So
that is good.
That's a good metaphor.
I like that.
That's right.
Yeah, that's good.
Jefferson Smith writes in, John got this totally right. Republicans were so excited to present this bill, then shocked when it is such a disaster. I think that's partly right, and we're going to see that in the next story. Chase Ibanez writes, in step one, gut health care and funnel hundreds of billions in tax dollars to the wealthy. Step two, I don't know. Step three, America's great again.
Also, a really fast point. I mean, to some extent, like, at the end of the day, they are accountable to their donors, not to their past actions. But when you spend years with the unifying theme of your party in government being, this is a terrible bill, it's going to end America, we have to attack it, and you try to repeal it dozens and dozens of times, and then, but things are changing over that time. People are starting to like the bill, they're starting to get used to certain parts of it, but you stick with that same message. At some point, people expect you, even if you no longer are all that committed to the repeal, that's all you've had for so long that you may have to throw something out. There might be some Republicans that are just, this is where we're at as a party. If we don't do it, our base is going to freak out, even though we know that the country has shifted quite a bit.
Right, and if you take the 10-year view, the thing I find fascinating about this whole thing is, the idea of the Overton window. The Overton window where the debate keeps shifting. So 10 years ago, we started out where this is the Heritage Foundation, basically, maybe not exactly, but Obamacare is conceptually rooted in a Heritage Foundation plan, which became Romney Care, which became Obamacare, which now the Republicans are trying to get. So in some ways, the Republicans are eating their own plan, right? I mean, I'm not saying that Obamacare is a purely Republican plan, but if you take the trajectory, we've gone from this is basically a Republican compromise healthcare plan to the Republicans saying we must get rid of it.
Yeah.
They're essentially eating and trying to destroy their own concept from 10 years ago.
Yeah. Because their concept of governance is nihilism. So that's what you have. All right, last tweet is Miri writes in, just before we started talking about it in the last segment, this infighting would be the perfect moment to introduce a single payer bill, just saying. Well, we're like-minded on that, as you saw at the end of the segment. I want to thank a couple of donors to the journalism drive. It's tytnetwork.com/go to hire more journalists. $27 from Maria in Pennsylvania, $50 from Warren in North Carolina, and $50 from Diane in Illinois. You guys rock the world. And we've got a lot more where that came from. Let's go to the crazy Breitbart story.
That's true. Do we know where we're at?
Sure, we'll pull that up a little bit later for you guys.
Sounds good.
On where we are on the journalism drive, because we are almost at 1.5. Ooh, drums. Who will be announced soon? Okay, what's next?
Okay, next we got a little bit of fun for you and some speculation. We learned last October that Paul Ryan had been involved in a call where he was pretty critical of then candidate Donald Trump. Understand this is at a time when it didn't seem super likely that Trump would become president. Now at the time, we didn't know all of the details, but now we do because as of today, Breitbart has leaked the audio tape in what one of their former spokespeople is calling a continuing campaign to damage Paul Ryan, and that is understandable. You're gonna agree perhaps after listening to this tape.
There are basically two things that I want to make really clear. As for myself as your speaker, I am not going to defend Donald Trump. Not now, not in the future. As you probably heard, I just invited him from my first congressional district GOP event this weekend, a thing I do every year. And I'm not going to be campaigning with him over the next 30 days. Look, you guys know I have real concerns with our nominee. I hope you appreciate that I'm doing what I think is best for you, the members, not what's best for me. And so I want to do what's best for our members, and I think that this is the right thing to do. I'm going to focus my time on campaigning for House Republicans. To everyone on this call, this is going to be a turbulent month. Many of you on this call are facing tough re-elections. Some of you are not. But with respect to Donald Trump, I would encourage you to do what you think is best and do what you feel you need to do. Personally, you need to decide what's best for you. And you all know what's best for you where you are. But the last thing I want to do is to help Hillary Clinton get the presidency and get Congress. So the last thing we want to be doing is giving Hillary Clinton a blank check in Congress. That's why I'm going to spend the rest of this month fighting for Congress, fighting for our majorities. I'm going to spend the next 28 days working hard with all of our members to get reelected because we need a check on Hillary Clinton if Donald Trump and Mike Pence don't win the presidency. But I want to basically close with this. His comments are indefensible. They're not in keeping with our principles. So I'm not going to try to defend him. I'm going to focus on Congress.
Wow.
Okay. Not a man who thought that Trump was going to be president.
So I'm not saying wow at Paul Ryan's reaction to the Access Hollywood tapes. That was fairly normal at the time, as John pointed out. I'm saying wow that this got released at this juncture. So whoever released this, and we have a pretty good idea who, we'll get into that in a second, just wanted to shiv Paul Ryan in the biggest way when he is most vulnerable. So there's dissension within the Republican Party about Ryan's healthcare proposal, and releasing this tape now saying he never stood by Donald Trump is going up to him as he's going to the showers in the prison and go and letting him bleed out. So I haven't seen this kind of over-the-top political attack maybe ever within the same party in my lifetime. So when you then look at the heart of the Breitbart article, which released this tape, it says over and over again how Ryan, quote, abandoned the now president in the final crucial weeks leading up to the all-important general election. And Ryan's decision to abandon Trump on the campaign trail has become a focal point in the healthcare negotiations. No, it hasn't. What are you talking about? You're the one who brought it up.
They mean we're trying to make it a focal point in negotiations.
And so, and I'm telling you, I'm just giving you a tiny taste of it. All throughout this very long article, it's Ryan, the betrayer of our beloved leader, Donald Trump. Oh my God. It is somebody in the White House. Obviously, we think it's Steve Bannon because he used to run Breitbart. He even did a purge of the people who disagreed with him before he left. So all he has is yes men left at Breitbart. But I actually think that one of the quotes makes me think it's not just Steve Bannon, that it might even be Trump himself. So one source, unnamed source in the White House said this quote within the article: the president gave Ryan a chance. Listen to how much this sounds like Donald Trump. The president gave Ryan a chance. If he doesn't get his act together soon, the president will have no choice but to step in and fix this on his own. He's the best negotiator on the planet, and if this were his bill and not Ryan's, it would not be this much of a mess. That's Trump.
Well, yeah, and we know that Trump has a history of telling a reporter, you can quote me off the record as an associate of Donald Trump himself. We know that that's happened in the past.
When he used the aliases of John Bannon, et cetera, he would often be his own unnamed source.
That's right. Yeah. That's interesting. That's really interesting. But my question will be on this is, if this was leaked by the White House, what does the White House want?
Exactly.
They want just a better bill?
Maybe they want Ryan scrambling, maybe getting Ryan to do something more favorable towards Trump. I honestly don't know.
No. The reason why I think there's some chance that it's Trump himself is because it's poorly thought out. Because it's such a mess. You look at this and go, how the hell does this help the Republicans? Right? That's why everybody's confused by it. Because normally you would do a strategy like, okay, I'm gonna undercut Paul Ryan because he's too moderate, and I'm gonna go in a more conservative. Okay, that's understandable, right? Now in this case, they're saying, that Ryan, and he better withdraw that bill before he knows what's coming to him. But you publicly back Ryan's bill. So you're throwing yourself under a bus. It's the typical incompetence that you would see from Donald Trump because he's lashing out. Because why? He's got ADD, as everybody talks about. So he's like, yeah, right, I'm good, I'm with you, good, go, right? Oh no, it's not going well. Oh, I wouldn't have done this. You're the mess. It's your fault. And what does he do? Like a child, he always blames someone else. And this is one giant blaming someone else. It's so poorly thought out. I'm not even sure it's Steve Bannon. I'm telling you, it might be just the big guy himself.
Yeah.
So they do like these QC things. Sorry, John, one quick second. They say Ryan has been unwilling to negotiate on the specifics of this bill. This is all, again, from the article, obviously like typed over and sent to Breitbart, right, by the White House. And they keep Trump and his true allies, despite what Ryan's allies inside the White House say publicly, have been much more willing to negotiate. Trump's trying to send a message. And then he labels it Obamacare 2.0, Obamacare Light, Ryan Care, Rhino Care. All of a sudden it's Ryan Care. Before everybody was calling it Trump Care. Now that it's going under, Ryan Care on me.
So this is supposed to, that's from Breitbart, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's not an editorial, that's their news reporting. God, they suck. They want to be a reputable news organization. I can't read that because it's spinning so fast.
Yeah,
but anyway.
no, you're absolutely right, John. The other thing that I got out of this article is this read like an old Soviet press release, or not even a press release, but like what they would print in Pravda.
True allies and loyalists, and
that's
very
right.
focused on loyalty.
The allies of the cause say this, whereas some have betrayed the cause.
Yeah,
and it's so over the top. You're like, who could believe this?
It's just not clear what he wants.
Well,
other than to not be embarrassed, he doesn't want to be tied to a bill that is a disaster. But it's not clear what he policy-wise, what he or the White House actually wants. Like, this is your bill.
Well, he said he had a couple of goals he laid out, getting prices, quote, way down. Everybody's covered. Deductibles are lower. He specifically said deductibles will be lower. But then when the actual bill comes out and he's totally hands off. I heard he was a great negotiator. I don't see any negotiating. They're not really talking about the bill unless they're specifically asked in a press briefing. Trump is talking very little about it, although he has tweeted a couple of basically references to the next steps will be better. But where is he during all of this?
Okay, so I don't like to speculate too much without any basic facts, but this seems like a fact-free vacuum now. This healthcare debate.
We have so little facts here. We don't even have time for alternative facts.
Right, exactly. But I wonder if Trump's strategy. I'm throwing it out there. I wonder if his strategy is Ryan will propose and the Republicans will push a detailed bill that is a disaster or not a disaster, looking like it's a disaster. And my negotiating position will be to do one little piece of it, like the state lines thing, deregulate across state lines, let insurance companies sell across state lines. And then I will eventually sign on to that relatively little piece, preserve the rest of Obamacare, but say that because we took that one piece and passed it, that is a, quote, repeal of Obamacare. I mean, there's got to be an exit strategy for Trump out of this, right? I mean, there's got to be, in theory, some exit strategy to this rather than just throwing 26 million people off healthcare.
So I have two kind of answers to your questions, right? And to your theory. So part one is people are always trying to figure out what Trump thinks. Remember, Trump doesn't know what he thinks. Like the one common mistake that everybody makes over and over again is they underestimate how stupid he is. So he never had a plan. And in this article, you can see it thrashing about wildly. Like, oh, conservative groups are upset. There's these Tea Party patriots that are upset, and the conservative groups are, and plus it won't pass the Senate because of the moderate Republicans. Well, how can you cure both of those things at the same time? Either you go right, in which case the right wing is happy, but those moderate Republicans will never vote for it. It has no chance of passage. And you keep talking about how the arithmetic doesn't add up in the Senate. Or you make the moderate Republicans, such as they are, happy, and then the Heritage Foundation and the Tea Party patriots will hate you even more. But so how do you answer that? The answer is Trump doesn't know. He doesn't know the difference between the Tea Party guys and the moderate guys, and he's never thought it through, and he thinks that there are always magic answers. Oh yeah, of course, we'll make it for everybody, and it'll be lower, and it'll cover. Why won't it cover?
It'll be beautiful.
It'll be beautiful. He's an impetuous child. He's like, why can't I have everything? Why can't I cover everything? It's Paul Ryan's fault. It's his fault. If I had done it, again, here's another reference here to Trump is a lot more willing to wheel and deal on this front than Ryan. It's Trump who wrote this thing, okay?
Wheel and deal.
So, who writes wheel and deal? And that's not a quote from anybody. That's in the article.
Oh, wow. Oh, my God. They suck. Jesus. Yeah. And look, he's also a guy who, I don't know him, but everybody says that he's willing to throw his allies under the bus. He likes to stick the shiv in. He thinks, at the end of the day, what's important is what makes him look good and makes him look successful. He may actually think that he can torpedo Ryan, torpedo this current effort, make Ryan look terrible, that whole thing goes down in flames, not realizing that as president, he's not independent of his party in Congress. If he wants the rest of his agenda to be worked on, having the first huge thing you work on totally sink, totally fail, hurts him too, but he's such a self-centered person that he may not realize that that's even how it functions.
I don't understand what the exit strategy is.
So I'm going to explain the Republican exit strategy in a second, because in the midst of this article, through the madness, I think I figured out what their actual plan is, and Ted Cruz has it. Trump doesn't have it, Ryan doesn't have it, Ted Cruz has it. So, but to all your guys' point, the Trump is short-sighted, and so he just thinks, how do I win the moment now?
Yeah.
The only thing that matters
is totally in the present.
Yeah, in this media minute, how do I win this media minute?
Yeah.
I'm losing terribly. This is a mess. I'm not winning anymore. So what am I going to do? First thing is blame it on someone else. That's go-to move number one. Then I'll figure out things after that, right? And it's too conservative, and it's too liberal. You're not winning, not me. Okay, all right, we've talked about that. Now the exit strategy. So in the midst of this, they explain that Ted Cruz thinks, well, we don't need 60 votes. The Democrats are going to filibuster this thing, like we filibustered everything when the Democrats were in charge. The Democrats needed 60 votes for Obamacare, but we don't need it, and we can do reconciliation. Now, that it only applies to just budgetary issues. They cannot use it for most of the bill. Now, how is he going to get around it? He says, oh, I came up with a new idea. The vice president has constitutional authority to just pass things with 50 votes. What? That's not a thing that exists, but they're Republicans, they don't care. So the idea that I think that Cruz and the conservatives are hatching is, hey guys, make the bill even more conservative, go in the direction that, and there's one reference in this long article about you didn't understand how to do it the Trump way. Ryan never understood the Trump way. I think the Trump way that they're referring to is just go full bore right. Don't worry about any of the moderates or Democrats or anything like that. Just go get all the right-wing Republicans you can. We'll just change the rules so that Mike Pence has some magical constitutional authority to get rid of Senate rules, and he could be the parliamentarian that decides how to apply the rules, including reconciliation, and we'll just say it applies to the whole bill, and he just magically does that. That way we only need 50 votes. I could even lose Susan Collins and another moderate Republican. If I hold my conservatives, boom, we pass it. So that is probably, honestly, their best hope. But that is
precedent.
Yeah, that is a tiny, you got to thread that needle pretty hard to get into there.
And then he thinks, if he's thinking ahead at all, that having lots of people lose their health care under his bill or Ryan Care or Trump, whatever you want to call it, that'll help him in the election?
See, again, not thinking that far.
He's just not thinking that far. That's like way too far.
Yeah, and by the way, that Cruz idea, it's not like it's Trump's idea, right? Trump doesn't know what the hell he's doing. The conservatives are pushing in that direction. They think we can get it done. And for the guys at the Heritage Foundation and the Koch brothers and all those donors, to them, yeah, the 26 million losing their health insurance, or actually under the new draconian plan, it'll probably be 30 million or more. It's like, wait, are they my donors? Are they my voters? Yeah. Are they my family? No, then why would I care? The Trump way is, I don't give a damn about you, right? I only care about myself. That's it, that's the Trump way. So we can convince Trump to go hard right and jam this thing through and damn the torpedoes.
It's a combination of, on some level, not really caring. I mean, they were perfectly happy with the way things were before Obamacare, when tons and tons of people that currently have health insurance didn't. But then you combine it with some of them actually believe that you take off the regulations and all that, you lower the taxes and all that. And yeah, the country's going to do great. That's the perfect solution to all of your concerns about the human cost of their bills, is we truly believe that this will stimulate the economy, blah, blah, blah. They thought it with George W. Bush's tax cuts. We saw the end result of that, and a lot of them probably think it now.
You know, I don't want to get too deep into that debate, but I actually think almost none of them actually believe that.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm straining the definition of the word believe.
Right.
But everybody has to sleep at the end of the day.
Allege.
They certainly allege. But it's a convenient fiction to allow you to continue on in a world, see human suffering, and not care. Okay, we have a lot of those actually.
All right, we got to do the Jared Kushner story.
We do. Man, this hour has flown by. Jesus. Jared Kushner's family corporation is in the final stages of an extremely lucrative real estate deal with a Chinese corporation. Bloomberg reports that Anbang Insurance Group plans to strike a $4 billion deal to invest in Kushner Company's office tower that's located at 666 Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. You know, I didn't even notice that until now. 666. Is it really 666? It is. Wow. Amazing. Okay. Well, this is a devil of a deal right here. The deal values that particular building at $2.85 billion, which, if you're keeping track, is the highest value ever given for a building in Manhattan. Weird how that works out, but it did. And Jared Kushner's family will yield at least $400 million personally out of this deal. Now let's break down a little bit of how they're gonna get that money. A portion of the deal pays off a vast portion of $250 million in debt that company has incurred since the last time they refinanced their debt. Under the terms of the deal, as they stand right now, the Kushners will be able to retire that debt by paying off just $50 million, 20% of the total amount. And so if you talk to real estate experts, of which I am not and know almost nothing, they're saying that this does seem, and even to me, it seems like a particularly good value for Kushner. Now, it is the family, I should say, rather than just Jared Kushner personally. Now, it's possible that the building, that real estate is booming and things are working out for Manhattan again, but people are saying that this is not a building that has typically done very well. The idea that you would value it so highly seems odd. And the timing is, of course, suspect. I mean, we're all a little bit concerned about the possible conflicts of interest between Trump and his circle and Chinese corporations. He just got those 36 or 38 pending trademarks passed a couple of weeks ago. Now, we do have to take note that Jared Kushner sold his personal ownership stake in 666 Fifth to avoid any conflicts of interest. And so, of course, there can't be a conflict of interest because it's just his family that would be enriched, and who would be affected by that?
I'm sure you won't inherit any of that money or use it in any other way. Okay, so look, in this deal, the devil's in the details. And I do know real estate a little bit. I worked on it at a small scale, and I know a lot of folks who are working on it on a very large scale. So now, if they make $400 million on a transaction of this size, it's not earth-shaking. That's a good deal, and they got a nice return on it. But it doesn't necessarily raise eyebrows in a normal situation. But this is not quite normal because the building was not doing well. It was not in a position to turn a great profit, let alone any profit. So if the building, it was booming times and the building's doing well and it's in Manhattan and it's a prestige building, I don't think that this story is interesting. But given that the building was not doing well, it gets rescued, then there's a strange matter of they've got an extra $250 million loan that gets knocked down to a $50 million loan. It doesn't work that way. Where the hell did that extra $200 million go? It went, somebody else paid for it. Nobody goes, hey, you know what? I know that you just made a huge profit on this deal, but you don't have to pay me back $200 million. That's not a thing that happens in the world, right? So somebody got paid back that $200 million. So who paid him the $200 million? What does it mean that they only had to pay 20% of it? That is so weird. Now, this Anbang Insurance Group is so connected to Chinese government that when they bought the Waldorf Astoria, President Obama refused to stay there because they were worried that it would be wiretapped by the Chinese government in the middle of New York, okay? So this is deeply connected to the Chinese government. All of a sudden, the Kushners who are struggling with this building get handed a giant gift by a company tied to the Chinese government. Well, what a lucky break they got.
Yeah.
Look, this is deeply disturbing. I mean, these guys are brazen. They didn't wait a year and a half. They didn't even wait 2 months. And they're like, oh, we have a little trouble. Who knows how long Trump's gonna be in office, right? Cash in, cash in, cash in. And now, to be quote unquote fair to them, This is an old political trick. They're not the Trumps and the Kushners are not the first to do it. Neil Bush profited off the Bush family for years and years. He'd do all these sketchy deals because his last name ended in Bush, and they were trying to get favors from George W. Bush and his dad. George W. Bush got bailed out by the Saudis when his dad was president. And when he had failing oil businesses in Texas, these Republican presidents, they are so incompetent business-wise. Bush couldn't make an oil business in Texas work. Trump couldn't make casinos work. And all of a sudden, of course, here comes these foreign interests, the Saudis, the Russians, the Chinese, to keep on bailing them out, and later they become president. Well, that's a win-win for all of them, and a giant loss for the American people because they're not serving us, they're serving those folks.
Yeah. I mean, my view on this deal is to be clear, is that the New York Times did a big expose into the amount of foreign money that is going in generally into real estate. That Russian oligarchs, the Chinese government, places where there's huge masses of relatively new money, if you will, needs a place to be parked. And they traced back how in New York and in Los Angeles that there's more and more foreign money being invested in real estate as a place to simply park investments. So it's hard to know whether this is that trend or this is that trend plus an attempt to buy influence with Trump's circle. I think that the political question here that's really important is if you know that this is a trend that's going on and you're the Kushner family tied to Trump, the fact that there's no attempt to even prevent a image of a potential problem. That it's just, forget it. We don't even care what it looks like. Maybe it's something, but we don't care what it may look like or what questions it raises. That's the kind of new paradigm we're living in where there's no pretense. It's the brazenness, there's no pretense.
Yeah, in the past, you would have been worried about the appearance of a conflict of interest. They're like, appearance, let's just do the real thing. And who cares what happens, it's the Trump way. So, and I want to give just one more piece of context here, because it's true that New York is flooded by foreign money, and it's a lot of time people who are trying to launder the money and get it out of their home countries. And so it could be a twofer that they want to do that and get some political clout along the way, because this is a big payoff for just hiding your money.
Look,
there's safer and smarter ways to hide your money.
If you're looking to park your money in New York in general, and you're a government with business before Trump, you're like, I got plenty of different places I could invest. Oh wait, that one I already want to buy in New York. Oh, that's owned by the Kushners. Oh, that's like a bonus, right? I can make them some money.
Their head. They know
that's right.
At least how it will appear, whether that's their initial motivation or not. And I don't know that we've talked about it on the show, but there's been a couple of stories over the past I guess 2 weeks or so of some massive payments for buildings to Donald Trump. The $90 million for that one building that was apparently run down and never ended up being used. Now, I don't believe in any of those cases it was Chinese corporations, but these things do have a way of happening. And we also know that it looks like one of their strategies might be that if we had one instance of clear corruption, it's easy to investigate that and it looks bad. But man, if you just put something out every week, every 5 days or so,
flood the zone theory.
You flood them. And are we going to be talking about this in a week? I don't know, and I can personally assure it, but I can't.
So, and again, context, Vornado Realty Trust made a killing on this deal, but they, in a lot of ways, deserve that to make that, because Jared Kushner originally brought the building. This was his big thing, like, hey, Dad, you used to run real estate just like Trump. I got this now, Daddy. And he bought the building in 2007. Oops, right before the crash. So Vornado came in and bought 49.5% of the building right after the crash, and they got it for a song. So when they exited in this deal, they made like tenfold their money, but that's not a problem. That was a smart deal on their part, right? And so, but Kushner did not, he bought it when it was high. So it was much harder for him to exit with a profit, and somehow he did anyway. I mean, Bloomberg originally broke the story, and they tried to give both sides as much as they could. So they went to Scott Singer, and he's a guy who works in real estate, and he's got his name on it. He doesn't want to throw these guys under a bus. So he says the deal was aggressive, but not absurd. Like the best defense they could find was not absurd. Okay, Joshua Stein on the other side, another New York real estate lawyer, says, this is a huge, huge exit strategy for an office building. It's a home run of a transaction, to give you the proper context. And finally, one little extra bit of skirting the law. They're using EB-5 here to also get people pathway to citizenship for China. So they get to park their money, plus they're gonna get citizenship. But you're only allowed to use EB-5 in projects that create jobs in economically distressed areas. It's Fifth Avenue. It's literally the least distressed area on the planet.
Well, we know it's not distressed. Apparently the real estate's worth way more than it used to be.
That's exactly right. Man, they are so brazen. They don't care about the law at all. All right, we are unfortunately out of time. There's a lot of great stories in the news today, but those are big, big ones.
Yeah.
David Sirota, thanks for coming in. Everybody check out International Business Times where David writes regularly.
Thank you, thanks for having me, guys.
All right, we'll be back with Jordan Chariton and some amazing stories in the second hour, including that Fukushima story, which has facts that it's hard to imagine.
Yeah. We don't think it'll bore you.
No, it is amazing. Let alone the corruption of Rex Tillerson and how he was, which leads to a super fun poll about the dumbest Republican aliases. So we'll do that when we come back. Young Turks, Jake Guru, John Idaho, legendary TYT reporter Jordan Cherry. What is this?
Hello, how you guys
doing?
All
right, good. Glad you could join us. Love it when you guys are in town. All right, let me read tweets about the last hour. Rachel says, of all the pictures of Paul Ryan you could have chosen, I'm glad you went with that one. So
it's
just
JR, man.
Yeah, just an FYI to you guys, and that's part of why we read the tweets so we can tell you some of the stuff. Whenever there's audio instead of video, JR chooses the picture to put in. And if it's a Republican, he'll almost always choose an embarrassing one. Yeah. Yes, we do it on purpose.
And you can't just because it's audio doesn't mean you can not watch the video, because sometimes they'll also slip in like funny titles for them that'll change throughout it. So pay attention to that.
That's right. Chris Allen says the Republicans are breaking apart, but unfortunately we don't have a decent Democratic Party to take advantage. Very true. And the mathematician says, isn't it so cute when Republicans get caught on tape trying to stab each other in the back before they cave and grovel before the alpha male? Yes, generally cute. Jerry Cloud says, maybe Trump standing off and letting Republicans run with their plan will be his leverage against them when it fails if impeached. No, so that's a little convoluted, but no, I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to mention one other thing in that story. Trump is thinking short term, I gotta, rescue myself from this disaster. It doesn't look like it's gonna pass. I'm gonna blame Paul Ryan, and he backstabbed me during the election anyway. Perfect, it's a twofer, whatever, right? In his small little mind. Not remembering that if you do get in a world of trouble, which is enormously possible, and there is impeachment proceedings, guess who's gonna be thinking, come to Papa.
Well, that would mean he knows how the American government works.
That's right. And by the way, that article, that Breitbart article, kept saying, if Paul Ryan continues to be speaker. And it was unbelievably over the top. I didn't mention that either. Over and over again. I mean, I don't know why Paul Ryan's even speaker. I guess there should probably be a new speaker.
Well, they had the same sort of campaign against the previous speaker, and it worked out for them. For the most part, they didn't necessarily get the person they wanted, but they can take someone down if they try hard enough.
Yeah. Finally, Billy Runaway says the devil wears Ivanka. And let's see the TRTnetwork.com/go, the journalism drive. $50 from Blake in New York, $50 from Cindy in Montana, $50 from Janice in Vermont. And man, there we are, almost there, almost there. 1,434,909. If we get to 1.5 million, we make new announcements with new names, with new contributors that I think you will absolutely love. So, and every one of you that contributes, you could be super proud of all the stories that Jordan and Nomi and Michael and the new folks who are going to do the stories bring for you guys, including, by the way, Ryan Grimm, Sean King, and all the wonderful contributors we hired as well. Okay, all right, John, what's up?
Okay, let's do it. I know you've been looking forward to this. ExxonMobil is currently under investigation for allegedly hiding from both their shareholders and also the public at large what they knew about global climate change and mankind's contribution to it, which they have a part in. And as a result of that investigation, we now find out that Rex Tillerson, once executive of Exxon, current Secretary of State, had some shady behavior of his own. The Attorney General's office involved in the investigation said in a letter earlier this week that it found Tillerson had used an alias email address under the pseudonym Wayne Tracker, PI at large, from at least 2008 through 2015. So this was not like, oh, I logged into the wrong email one day. He used it for 7 years. The letter, seen by Reuters, said Exxon had not previously disclosed the alias account, that Exxon had produced some 60 documents bearing the Wayne Tracker email, but never said it was used by Tillerson for relevant communications at Exxon. It asked the court to order Exxon to identify whether any other email accounts were used by Tillerson. So the story today is Wayne Tracker. The story tomorrow might be some other weird porn star name. And we don't know what issues that might be linked to, but this might go deeper than just the tracker files.
To be fair,
we're tracking it down.
Yeah. He might have been referring to Waingro from Heat. Maybe he just loved that character. So, God, well, at that time he wasn't a politician, to be fair to him, but politicians do come up with super goofy aliases. We're gonna get back to that on a poll. We're gonna have you participate in a second. But to the heart of this story, you don't use an alias unless you're trying to hide something.
Yeah.
And if you're saying, hey, let's send some climate change emails, but I'm not Rex Tillerson, I am Wayne Tracker. That means you know that the climate change emails are gonna show that you knew what was going on. If you think climate change doesn't exist and you have the evidence for it, why wouldn't you just send the emails under Rex Tillerson? That's what you use for every other email.
Yeah. Well, they actually said it. I mean, the company spokesperson said these were used in place for secure and expedited, meaning we need to secure the truth. We don't want you to actually see that we know what's going on. We're trying to cover it up. This goes in line with Rex Tillerson, his own home. He didn't want fracking near his own home. He joined a lawsuit in 2014 against fracking. So the corruption and the total swindling is quite evident when it comes to him. And what I found really fitting is when I was covering the Native Nations March on Friday, thousands of people outside the White House, Trump and Rex Tillerson were having lunch. So that was fitting.
Yeah, and so New York Attorney General Eric Schneiderman is the one pursuing this case and why we're finding out about this story in the first place. And he ain't nothing to mess with. So in this, when you've got an actual court case and you start doing depositions and you start asking requests for information, they can't just shred the files. And you can't just hide it by saying, no, that was not Rex Tillerson, it was Wayne Tracker. No, there's no law that says I can't see Wayne Tracker's emails, and it's not that hard to figure out. So these knuckleheads, it looks like, are gonna get caught on this. Now, why are we having the investigation in the first place? Because it could be that they did potentially false or misleading statements to investors or the public. So if you know that climate change is real and it is man-made, and it has potentially devastating consequences, and you hide that not only from the public, but from your own investors, well, that's a big misrepresentation, because that could affect the future stock price of ExxonMobil. If it turns out, we find out that climate change is real, man-made, caused by getting oil and gas out of the ground, well, ExxonMobil investors would want to know that because it's going to affect their stock price. And if you hide that, that's illegal.
Yeah, and so look, if you were actually acting in the best interest of your corporation, you would see what's going to happen not too long in the future, and you'd start to shift your business to away from fossil fuels, which have a limited shelf life, a limited future, and into something that both doesn't destroy human civilization and also is more sustainable in the long term. Now, obviously, individual executives have a short-term motivation to keep things moving as they have been because they don't want to potentially upset their stock price. But if you were looking long-term, that's what you do. Unfortunately, in America, that's not how the oil companies work. That's not how the banks work. But we are seeing a couple of oil companies are apparently starting to get this message a little bit as a result of the Shell video from the early 90s coming out, indicating that they knew that this was going to cause problems even back then, that we were contributing to climate change. I've looked at these oil companies, and a lot of them are in far too small dollar values, trying to move into other areas, investing in both education about climate change, but also into renewable energies. And of course they should. In the long term, why not do it? You can still make tons of money. The government is still gonna give you huge tax credits and subsidies and all that stuff, and you can do it while not dooming humanity in the process.
But it's not just Rex Tillerson. I mean, look at Kelsey Warren, the CEO of Energy Transfer Partners. He uses the same energy industry talking points that fossil fuels is the wave of the president. They really poo-poo solar, wind, all that. And then he's building the biggest wind farm in the Caribbean right now. So whether it's Tillerson, whether it's Kelsey Warren, name your big oil stooge, but they're all con men on the issue.
Yeah, and think about why what do you like? Come on, you libs. The ExxonMobil is going to make more money from oil and gas. Well, not if it's not sustainable. Eventually, it'll sink the company if you have not shifted towards renewable energy, and that's why some of them are, right? While pretending that it is sustainable. So now, and if you're asking again, to John's point, why are they pretending? Why bother pretending? Because their interests are not the same as ExxonMobil's interest. Their interest is, I am an executive in this company for a short period of time. And in that time, I want to maximize my profit, right? And so if ExxonMobil crashes later, that's their problem, not my problem. But while I'm here, I'm going to keep this evidence stocked away. That way, I also don't have as much cost in rebuilding a whole renewable energy side of my business. Yeah. Although again, some are because they're thinking ahead. And they think they're going to be around longer. But in Rex Tilerson's case, he already moved to Secretary of State. He's already out of ExxonMobil. So his interests are in line with who cares what the investors think in the company and the public. The public, I don't care about them at all. If I tell everybody there is no climate change, even if I know the opposite, I'm going to make more money while I'm CEO of ExxonMobil.
And think about this is crazy. But let's say he stops being Secretary of State someday. Maybe he goes back.
Oh, that revolving door would never happen.
But I mean, he's still working for them. He got like $100 million or something like that payout from ExxonMobil. You think they're paying him that for him to go out and say, you know, we're open to climate change?
Right. Yeah, there's like a $600 million blind trust future shares of ExxonMobil.
Right.
I don't know how that's a blind trust, but it's the Trump days. Who knows? Maybe it is in some complicated way. And then he has more immediate money that he said he was going to get rid of within 90 days. He hasn't, as Trump has been doing ad after ad for ExxonMobil, and it's possible that the amount of money that's at least $50 million, and it's going up every single day as they continue to push forward these fictions and ads for ExxonMobil. So let's get to our fun poll, okay? Because he's got this Wayne Tracker alias, but he's not the only one who's used an alias in political circles, and that includes Democrats as well. First of all, of course, there's the president. Donald Trump would call reporters and pretend to be Donald Trump's PR person, John Barron. So he would say, "Hi, this is John Barron." And Donald Trump is fantastic. Madonna didn't turn him down; he turned Madonna down. I'm not kidding. That's real stories. So we're asking you to vote who's going to have the best alias here at tyrtnetwork.com/alias. Okay, John Barron for Donald Trump, Wayne Tracker for Rex Tillerson, or Carlos Danger. That's the one that Anthony Weiner used while he was doing sex tweeting.
No contest.
Yeah.
Really? Yeah. I have my answer here. What's Carlos Danger?
Carlos Danger.
It's too good.
It's good, but it's also a little bit too ridiculous. I like Wayne Tracker.
Wayne Tracker is
Intergalactic
badass.
bounty hunter, Wayne Tracker. And also, it's easy to mock Donald Trump for calling up and pretending to be someone else. But come on, if you were Donald Trump, wouldn't you pretend to be someone else? In any opportunity you had.
So, but they also all double as porn names.
Yeah.
John Barron, Wayne Tracker, and Carlos Danger. And the latest, I don't want to say it.
Yeah, let's not, actually.
Okay, so tyrtnetwork.com/alias. This is a good opportunity for me to quickly tell you, though, about the results of the last poll that we did. It was very important. I didn't get to share it with you. And I know that the country's on pins and needles on this. Is Cenk's latest nickname cool or not cool?
Wait, can I guess the numbers?
Yeah, hold on. First, let me remind people what the nickname was. It's Tupac. Because I started Wolfpack and just Democrats. And so I thought that's kind of cool, Tupac. That sounds pretty neat. Now, John, guess if the audience thought it was cool or not cool.
Okay, so I think it's obviously, sorry, not cool. Yeah. But I do think that the audience really likes you, and they like the connotation of the Tupac and what those packs are doing. So I'm guessing it's going to be close to 50-50. People being honest and people being bootlickers.
40-60.
40-60 against or for?
Against.
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 Okay. They're not bootlickers.
I'm totally joking about that.
Okay, all right. Well, here's who's not. In this, every single person on air voted against me. Everyone? Every single person. Yes.
What's the numbers?
No, on air. I'm saying among you guys. Okay. Now the numbers. You know what? You're pretty close to right. 36% saying cool. 64% saying not cool.
Wow.
Yeah, so
6%.
Well, that's because you guys all threw me under a bus. I had no support from you guys. Okay, if you're gonna be dicks about it.
It's called bootstraps. Okay, apply it to your nickname.
Okay. All right. What's next?
Okay. It's one of my favorite stories in a while. It's been 6 years since the disaster at Fukushima, and the cleanup of that disaster is not only still ongoing, but the amounts being spent on it have risen dramatically over those 6 years. In case you're not familiar with it, blessedly unfamiliar with a terrible event, a massive undersea earthquake on March 11th of 2011 sent a tsunami barreling into Japan's northeast coast, leaving more than 18,000 people dead or missing. During that, 3 reactors were sent into meltdown at the plant in the worst such accident since Chernobyl back in the late 1980s. Now, in November of last year, the Japanese government said that the cleanup and compensation costs for the disaster would be an unprecedented $180 billion, doubling the earlier estimates. Now, understand that this cleanup is not only continuing now, it will continue to go on for at least several decades. And so the estimate that was $90 billion at one point and $180 billion last year could well continue to rise.
So let me jump in with an important substantive point before we give you the amazing details. These details will blow you away. But this whole $180 billion, this is the problem with a lot of the old forms of energy. They privatize the gains and socialize the costs. So are those companies going to pay $180 billion? Of course not, they can't afford it. And so, hey, when they're making the money and the profits, they got to pocket all of it. And then when Japan gets hit with a $180 billion bill, sad day for the Japanese people. So, and the oil companies and the coal companies and the gas companies do it on an even bigger scale. So we're melting their planet, the ozone layer is getting eroded, we've got climate change. Well, that cost is borne by all of us, including a massive famine and drought happening in Africa today. Well, you bear those costs, they keep all the profits.
Yeah.
So this is just another extreme example of it.
Yeah, and with numbers that are just difficult to comprehend. I mean, we're talking about larger than the GDPs of many, many countries that are being spent just on the cleanup from this one accident. And so there are some amazing things that have developed out of this. Now, if you remember back during the initial disaster, there was this large zone that could not be inhabited by humans. There will be a zone off into the rest of human civilization that will not be able to be inhabited. But they're trying to get some of those villages back on their feet, clean them up so that people can once again inhabit them. But they're coming up against a couple of problems, one of which is, I kid you not, radioactive bores. And so once humans moved out of the area, in the same way as happened in Chernobyl, wildlife filled that void. And without humans to hunt them and drive them off, their numbers exploded. And boars, this is actually the case in America as well, in many parts of the South, they will come in there and they will begin to breed in huge numbers. And because of the radiation in the area, which they apparently are not as affected by as humans, they're very dangerous to consume, with levels of radioactive material 130 times above Japan's safety standards. But the crazy thing is not that there are radioactive boars. It's the number of radioactive boars. They've already killed 13,000 of them.
And it's not enough, they're still running around. So what happened was that they're in the woods and there's the villages, the towns. Everybody is removed from the 12-mile exclusion zone. The boars come down, but they're already radioactive because of the disaster. That's why it's an exclusion zone and the humans aren't there. So they've taken, and then they find food, right? And they start eating the food and they start multiplying. So this, you know what? I mean, look, well, number one, it sounds like a movie where the radioactive boars have taken over, right? And it's the radioactive boars versus the zombies. Number two, American hunters, how much would they love to be able to go into the exclusion zone to hunt radioactive boars?
Be all over Fox News, my gosh.
Yeah, and
send Trump's kids. They love that stuff.
Some of the nuclear rods, if you get close to them, now of course you won't go to the plant, right? But if you got close to them, humans die within 1 minute. That's how much there is radiation in the fuel, in the nuclear rods, okay? Yeah. Now, you think knucklehead American hunters won't be like, oh yeah, let's go do the radioactive boars anyway. Yeah. Right? Don't go into the exclusion zone. It's a really bad idea. It's not just boars that become radioactive. And then of course there's Godzilla.
But clearly, okay. The media's trying to hush it up, but he's out there. And I'm glad that you brought up the 1 minute thing because I've been following this since the event happened because just the numbers are so big and the danger there as well. And so as Cenk said, a human can't survive much longer than a minute at a certain range from these rods. But it's even worse than that. It kills humans in a minute. It destroys robots in 2 hours. Like the robots they send in just to look at what's going on, to try to get close to the spent nuclear fuel so it can eventually be retrieved, they die. And these are robots, by the way. They die in 2 hours. They take 2 years to build individually.
They're not normal robots. They're radioactive resistant robots, and they still malfunction and cease to function within 2 hours. It's amazing. But we haven't even gotten to the more amazing facts.
So let's talk about some of the cleanup effort that's ongoing. So look, there was the meltdown that happened. This is 6 years ago. But spent nuclear fuel is not like wood that's on fire, and it continues to be a problem for a long time. Tokyo Electric Power Company is still pumping water nonstop through the 3 reactors to cool melted fuel that remains to this day too hot and radioactive to remove, generating 400 tons of contaminated water every single day for years and years and years. They have almost 1 million tons of that contaminated radioactive water in a storage space, and so they're going to need more storage spaces. That's just amazing. Look, how long are they going to have to do this? Is it going to be years? Is it going to be decades? Is it going to be longer? Eventually, they are going to have to cap the entire thing like Chernobyl.
But also, something that's really troubling is a lot of these workers are taking off their hazmat suits. Like we saw that in Josh Fox's documentary, the long-titled one, I can't remember, oil spills and all this all over the world. They're taking off their hazmat suits. So besides the threat of the bore, all the however many are cleaning this up for years, their health is very much a risk.
Yeah, and we should also recognize that at the time of the event, and this has been the case in a couple of nuclear problems like this, there were individuals, engineers working at the power plant that gave their lives to attempt to limit the damage of it as it was ongoing. And so they can't be forgotten as we look back on this event as well.
To Jordan's point, I want to read 2 more amazing facts. There are also more than 3,500 shipping containers holding radioactive sludge left over from the initial efforts to decontaminate all that water.
Yeah.
You know how big shipping containers are? So these giant shipping containers, there's 3,500 of them that's got radioactive sludge in it, let alone the 962,000 tons of water. And by the way, think about that, man.
Every day.
It's been 6 years since the nuclear meltdown. The water is still too hot after 6 years. And they have to keep pouring the water in constantly to cool it off, otherwise it's gonna have an even bigger explosion. And they have to keep storing that toxic water. And then finally, to Jordan's point, every day some 6,000 cleanup workers dispose of their protective hazmat suits and other gear, so far generating nearly 65,000 cubic meters of gear, enough to fill 17 million 1-gallon containers. So every day they got to get rid of those suits, 6,000 workers, day after day after day. The waste and the devastation from this nuclear fallout is amazing. Unparalleled.
And it continues, and they're planning for decades from now where they're going to store some of this stuff. They had a plan at one point, by the way, that contaminated water that's been moved through the nuclear fuel to try to cool it. At one point, they considered diluting it and releasing it into the ocean. That was not a popular plan, thankfully, but don't discount it. It could possibly happen.
Well, they got to put it somewhere. Where the hell are they going to put it?
God only knows.
And so the Japanese fishermen are like, no, don't put it in the water. The boar are already radioactive. Then you're going to put it in the water, and the fish are going to get radioactive, and then we're going to eat the fish.
Yeah.
No. So
and that was already a fear after the initial disaster as well.
This is not sustainable. You know, they talk about sustainable energy, wind, solar. This is not sustainable.
Yeah. There's one other thing I wanted to mention though. So we did a story about a month ago about some of the environmental concerns over a proposed expansion to the Turkey Point nuclear generating plant in Florida. And so there's obviously concerns in the wake of Fukushima that this sort of flooding could happen eventually at other nuclear sites and potentially cause the same sort of devastation. So they already have this plant near the coast. They're going to be building 2 additional plants. And so I used a tool, it's publicly available, you can use it, and you can look at particular parts of the coastline, you can input the expected warming that's gonna happen due to global climate change, and you can see the change in the coastline based on those increases. I used the most conservative increase in global temperatures that there's no way we're not going to exceed. Those locations where they're planning to build the nuclear power plants will be underwater within 70 to 100 years. And they are still going to build them there. And so maybe not during our lives, but during our kids' lives, that is going to be an absolutely massive problem. And we're setting up that problem right now. I don't know why that's not a bigger part of the conversation.
Don't put nuclear power plants next to the water. But they do, because they need water for the nuclear power plants.
Yeah, and these particular ones actually have these massive channels that they use that they say are hermetically sealed from ocean water and drinking water, but we told you they're not. There's reports showing that they're not. They use that as an integral part of their cooling station. That's right now in Turkey Point.
And don't move people back in when there's radioactive boars on the loose. I know boars are aggressive to humans without the radioactive. I mean, I'm no expert, but they are. So, I mean, I know people want to move home and all that, but that's
gotta take up boars first.
Yeah, don't forget what happened to Robert Baratheon.
I was already thinking about that. And by the way, you know the solution to radioactive boars, radioactive wolves. Send them in.
I think Trump should go and clear it before anyone goes back.
Well,
maybe we get Sarah Palin in a helicopter with a high-powered rifle.
That's what I was thinking, yeah. But of course, the right answer is always Wolfpack.
Yes.
Wolf-pack.com.
Radioactive wolf-pack.com.
Okay, we're gonna take a quick break here, guys. When we come back, how much does the media over-report Muslim terrorism versus non-Muslim terrorism? The numbers, you're not gonna be surprised that they're disproportionate, I get that. But the degree to which they're disproportionate is fairly stunning. So find out when we come back.
TYT is unique in a lot of ways.
I'm gonna ask some uncomfortable questions.
I feel like I missed
out. So what is going on? If I don't eat, my head's gonna explode.
As I take my shirt off, just goes, is that your body?
Now we move to inappropriate story number 2.
I just never felt guilty about masturbation.
It's amazing.
I could take partial credit for opening up your sexuality.
I was the kid in the pool with the shirt on. Let's just call it what it is. I was that kid.
Well, you deal with the bitch side of it, right? But you're my boss, so that's what happens.
I think we're more likely to win. They do see it from a frame of the rich and the powerful, and they don't realize that.
The last time that happened, we elected Abraham Lincoln.
I don't know, wouldn't it be wonderful if we unfucked the world?
You and I are a disaster.
Don't stereotype all cops, don't stereotype all anything. Blowing up like Dave Kohler on Twitter, that's pretty good progress. I didn't know you could leave positive comments. It's a very TYT thing. I'll tell you a whole bunch of depressing stuff, so that at the end I can give you hope. Winning is, in terms of change and positive change, is not just possible, it's inevitable.
Great time to be alive.
Let's burn this mother down, huh? Is that what you're saying? Fuck it, let's go do it. And that's why I keep thanking you guys for being members. Because together, we got their attention. Thanks for tuning in, and as always, stay strong. Back on the Young Turks, Larry Vetta writes in, all on-air talent voted against Cenk. Beware the Ides of March.
People also voted against him.
Yeah, I hear you, brother. I'm looking out for it.
Don't worry, Cenk, I understand having an unfortunate nickname. I get that.
No, I'm sticking with it. Tupac Uger, I'm proud. Speaking of nicknames, Becky Armstrong says, so what is everyone's secret ExxonMobil name? You know, I had one for Rex Tillerson. Instead of going with Wayne Tracker, he should have gone with Rexon Mobilson.
What was the football player's nickname? It was like Tony Mexico or something like that.
Yeah.
That's a cool one.
Vic's nickname, it's something Mexico. I love Julio Jones' nickname, Waffle House.
That's a good one.
Because he's always open. Okay, but two-pack isn't enough. I need something to go along with it. Like,
I'll think about it.
Do you see what
We'll
I'm
get
saying? You can't do me two-pack Huger if it's your alias. Your ExxonMobil name has to be like two-pack Danger or something, but that's taken. So,
damn,
and it's got to sound kind of porny, right?
It's getting there.
I don't want to give anyone ideas, but growing up, I was called Darth Dreidel. So.
That's a good start. That's a good start.
Darth Dreidel.
Okay. And let me do one last tweet for you guys. John Connor, big fuel taking a page from the smoking lobby and clouding the issue by hiding facts about climate change. Yeah,
and the funding of the science intended to deny it and muddy the waters, of course.
Yes,
which they still do.
It's an old trick. So member shout outs, and we'll do a fun post game here. Well, fun and interesting one. I'll tell you about it in a second. But members of the day are Nick Namar and Benny Gonzalez. So Nick and Benny, thank you so much. You can become a member. As I turn around and put this down, you can become a member by going to tytnetwork.com/join. You get the whole 2-hour show for free. You get all the network shows, including Aggressive Progressive, which Jordan is on from time to time, and you get all the post games, all that at tytnetwork.com/join. Okay, and no ads. So I will tell you a story that I was wrong about, and I will give you, and I'll explain why I was wrong. And so it's just a fun little story, but it's true. I was wrong about something, and I do want to clarify it. And then the second one is the deep state. Now I promised to talk about the deep state in another post game. We didn't get to it because we had a bananas post game that day that was fantastic. But I'm curious as to your two takes on it, and I'll explain what I think is the deep state. So it should be a great post game. Okay. All right, now let's do the rest of the stories.
Okay, lots of important stuff to get to. Earlier this year, Donald Trump complained that the media wasn't covering the particular sort of terror attacks that he felt they should. And we have a new study that shows that the media's coverage of terror attacks is consistently slanted in a particular direction. It just happens to be in the exact opposite direction that Donald Trump would have you believe. And so these are 3 academics who looked at almost 100 terror attacks culled from the Global Terrorism Database. Okay, and so this is a widely accepted definition of terror attacks. A lot of the attacks are ones that you'll probably remember from having been covered in the media. In total, there were 89 attacks committed by different perpetrators in the US during a 5-year period between 2011 and 2015. Now, of those 89 attacks that happened during that time, Muslims perpetrated 12.4% of them, which should be the story by itself. Because what American thinks that of the attacks that have been committed over half a decade, Muslims committed 12.4% of them? No American thinks that. Certainly no Republican voter thinks that.
I wish they'd done a follow-on question in this study. What percentage do you think? Now they didn't poll; they just looked at the actual facts in this case.
It'd be 85 to 95%.
What percentage of the terrorist acts are done by Muslims in America? Yeah, it would be an astoundingly high number, and then people would say online, "You guys ignore the real problems, and the real problem is Islam, obviously."
Yeah.
The real 12.4% of the problem.
Yeah. So let's break down the results of the study. Of those 89 attacks, 24 did not receive any media coverage from the sources that they examined. Now, admittedly, that's not every source, but they are probably some of the most representative sources, including LexisNexis, CNN, and all of that. Now let's break down the percentage of media coverage of those terror attacks based on the religious identification of the perpetrator. Let's bring up this first chart. You're gonna see there that if it was a Muslim perpetrator, 44% of the media coverage went to those sorts of attacks. Now you'll notice right under there, you have identified as Muslim, but also identified as foreign born. Now that is of course a subset of Muslim perpetrator, it's also a far smaller percentage of the actual attack. So if Muslim is about 12%, we're talking about less than a third of that being Muslims who are foreign born. And yet those couple of percentage points of perpetrators get a full third of all of the media coverage of terror attacks in the US between 2011 and 2016. And then finally, you have non-Muslim or unknown. I don't know who that could possibly be in the US, maybe white supremacists. 56% of the coverage, which sounds like a lot, but understand that we're talking about a group that commits over 80% of all the terror attacks.
88% of the terror.
88%.
So let me give even more context here. So if you're wondering, well, who are these non-Muslim terrorists? You know them, you just didn't have the press call them terrorists far too often. Frazier Glenn Miller, a white supremacist, former Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan, attacked a synagogue in Overland Park, Kansas. Robert Deere attacked Planned Parenthood in Colorado Springs. Wade Michael Page attacked a Sikh temple in Wisconsin. The list goes on and on. So you get a sense of it, right? Now, a terrorist attack is one that is done by a non-state actor for a political, religious, or other cause. So if you say, well, come on, Planned Parenthood, is that really a terrorist attack? It is the definition of a terrorist attack. Yeah. He did it for a political and, by the way, also religious purpose.
Yeah.
So, we did a story last week about how if you ask evangelical white Christians, when a Christian does a terrorist attack and says he is doing it because of Christianity, do you believe him? Like about 87% are like, no, that doesn't count, right? When you ask him, when a Muslim does a terrorist attack and says it's because of Islam, do you believe him? They're like, oh yeah. Yeah, that's definitely
True
because
Muslim.
of Islam. Yeah.
Well, when I was in the field covering the primary last year, I would question Cruz supporters, Trump supporters. So you're very focused on the threat of foreign Muslims and all this. What about the school shooters? What about Planned Parenthood? What about the movie theater shooters? And I'd get just a blank stare. Well, that's not terrorism. I said, no, it's a walk at the beach. And I remember I was out actually in Michigan covering the primary or something, and that Uber driver went on a shooting spree. Can you imagine? He killed 6 people in Kalamazoo. Can you imagine if that was a Muslim Uber driver? It would be a week. So I think the Fox Newsification of instilling fear in your audience is spreading to other media outlets. Exactly. CNN, their ratings skyrocket unfortunately, with ISIS attacks, things like that. And they should cover it. I don't want to say they shouldn't, but the how much they cover versus the Uber driver or a deranged person in a school or things like that, it's not even comparable. And that's how you have people at rallies that I'm interviewing very, very fearful of Muslims, but the school shooters, what can you do?
Yeah. So I just want to be clear on this. It is 2 different topics. The school shooters are not in this study because they're not considered terrorism. But I agree with Jordan that what am I worried about? I'm worried that my kids are going to get shot in a school, we're going to get shot in a movie theater because it is far more prevalent.
Yeah.
So even leaving aside, even if you don't count the non-Muslim terrorism of the Planned Parenthood shooters and the church shooters that say they're doing it for a political or religious reason, you take out all that stuff, the other stuff is bigger. It's bigger. The random shooters are much, much bigger. So if we really cared about keeping our families safe, we'd focus on that problem much more. Now, when you talk about the smaller issue of terrorism, Muslim and non-Muslim, well, what are we all focused on? The Muslim ban, the travel bans that Donald Trump talks about. He's like, the foreign-born Muslims are coming here and creating all the terrorism. To give you the exact number, of all the terrorist attacks in this 5-year period that they studied, 5% were from foreign-born Muslims. Now that got, as John pointed out, 32% of the news coverage. Gigantically disproportionate. Oh my God, the foreign-born Muslims. But in reality, they're only 5% of the terrorist attacks inside the US. The others are 95%. So we've ignored 95% of the problem and focused all of our energy on 5% of the problem.
And we reported on the DHS memo that said that the Muslim ban was unlikely to be any deterrent to terror attacks happening because citizenship they find is an extremely poor predictor for eventual radicalization or violent action. And in terms of like people's fear and what they focus on, and I've long criticized people's insane level of fear of certain types of things and not caring at all about other things that are far more likely to kill you, like a poor diet and air pollution and things like that. But look at like Charleston, the most clear terror attack possibly in our lifetime is a guy who said he was motivated by his religion and by his political ideology to start a race war people were hesitant to label him a terrorist. And then you have a president who tweets at about an attempted stabbing at the Louvre, where the only person who gets hurt is the attempted terrorist. But then we have to twist his arm to get him to acknowledge that a mosque was shot up. That's a twisted world that we live in. Now, really fast, I want to show you 2 more charts. Just a reminder of the numbers that we're working with. Go to this next one, you'll see the breakdown of the actual percentage of perpetrators there. And again, that 88% receiving disproportionately low coverage by the media. But then also, we're not just talking about the fact that these things are mentioned. We're talking about how much they're focused on by the media. You're going to see that in this next chart, the number of articles per attack that are written. If you're a Muslim perpetrator and you commit an act, they'll write almost 100 articles about it. If you're the rare Muslim foreign-born perpetrator, they double that to almost 200. But if you're a white terrorist, or we don't know for sure, they might mention you. But they're going to write something like 9 or 10 articles about it, and then they're going to move on to something else.
And there's also an element of media, lacking self-awareness, shocker. But the media correctly criticizes Trump for, what you're doing is going to recruit new ISIS members. Well, how do you think people in Pakistan, other countries, when they see the American media, very hyperbolic, nonstop, there's very little nuance and context in the reporting. They put neocons and the usual suspects on to basically fearmonger about the Muslims. So that doesn't exactly help our message across the globe either.
Yeah, and so to give you one more number, and this is from the Cato Institute. It's a different study. Cato Institute is a conservative institute, conservative and libertarian. They say your chance of being killed by a foreign-born terrorist in America is 1 in 3.6 million. So everybody's freaked out over this incredibly low percentage chance. I don't know if you've got a better chance of winning the lottery, but it's probably right in that ballpark, right? When in fact, to Jordan's earlier point, what's actually killing us is gun homicides, whether it's in mass shootings, terrorist shootings, or just your husband shooting, your wife shooting, your neighbor shooting, which is happening at an enormous rate and a record-breaking rate way past any other country.
Yeah, and look, I understand we as a species, first of all, we're flawed in that people think they can win the lotto. So I'm not surprised that they think that the chance of them being killed by a terror attack is almost as high. But then also, we get focused on the sexy, violent things. And so, look, gun homicides way more likely to kill you than terror attacks, but gun homicides are a small fraction of all the things that kill people, even just in America every year. If you don't want to die in America, if you don't want to die unnecessarily, stop focusing on Muslim terrorists and start focusing on the goddamn highway. Put away your phone when you're driving, because those sorts of accidents are far more likely to kill you. Look at the nutrition label on your food, because those sorts of things, which lead to most of the top 10 causes of death every single year, chronic illness as a result of diet, is far more likely to kill you. But that's not sexy. Nobody wants to talk about that, even though it's fully within your control.
Yeah, actually, I think it was, now this is a story John and I did together a while ago, so I'm gonna do it from memory. But I think it was about falls were number 6 on the list of things that kill you.
Yes.
So
falls from ladders and things like that.
Way above gun homicides, and like I forget the proportion, but nearly 1 million times more likely to kill you than a terrorist attack. So just make sure you don't fall down. And you'll be much better off than worrying about some guy coming in from Sudan to kill you.
Yeah.
Okay, speaking of which, not the killing you, but the Sudan part.
Oh, great transition there, demonizing the Sudanese, wonderful. Okay, well, I'm gonna try to flip the script here. This week, the UN is trying to draw attention and potentially money to help solve a massive humanitarian crisis, a huge and growing famine across multiple countries in both Africa and the Middle East. I want to read you this section of a statement by Stephen O'Brien, UN humanitarian chief, who said already at the beginning of the year, we're facing the largest humanitarian crisis since the creation of the UN, well over 60 years there. Now more than 20 million people across 4 countries face starvation and famine. Without collective and coordinated global efforts, people will simply starve to death. Many more will suffer and die from disease. And so members of the UN have been dispatched to try to draw attention to these ongoing crises in a number of countries. The Secretary General of the United Nations arrived in Somalia earlier today and appealed for less than $1 billion in aid to address drought and cholera in the East African nation. We've got a lot of numbers that we want to get to in just a second, but when I look at that number and I think about the cost in human lives, the sheer quantity of suffering that will likely happen in that region because we don't know that that money is actually going to be found. And then I think about the 55 additional $billion we're gonna throw into the most bloated military budget the world has ever seen. Think about how much goodwill you can buy. If you're being pragmatic, don't even think about the actual good you can do, just the goodwill by taking a tiny fraction of that and sending it to this part of the world to save people's lives and relieve some of the worst suffering going on this planet. But that's not the country that we have.
By the way, the greatest program we ever did was the Marshall Plan, where we helped our defeated enemies and they became our top allies in the world. It's not just to be decent people. It works, it's practical, it helps your economy in the long run. That's why we were beloved for a while in the world. And now what do? All we do is send over bombs. And so then Joe Scarborough will go on TV and go, they hate us because they hate us. When in reality, if we spent less than $1 billion, if you took one out of the $54 billion that they're asking for in additional money to the Pentagon and sent it to help 20 million people actually survive and live instead of die from famine, drought, and cholera and all these other things, imagine that they might love us because they love us.
Right. Yeah.
Because we actually did something right and all the benefits that accrue from that. Even if you just looked at it from economic terms, it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, add the 600 billion in tax cuts in the healthcare law, or the Bush tax cuts, or I mean, we could go on. The oil subsidies, the big pharma. I would like some of that money to go to America because there's a lot of Americans starving and this and that. But you could definitely put a dent in what you're seeing with these numbers if we would quit the corporate welfare and social Darwinism masked as Republican healthcare.
I think these Somali individuals should incorporate, and then our government might send them some money.
Yes.
It's more likely to happen there. I want to run through some of these other numbers though, because I want you to get an idea of the scale of the tragedy that we're talking about. Mr. Gutierrez said the money, that $825 million, is needed to help between 5 and 6 million people, about half of the entire population of Somalia, to survive for the next 6 months. Survival being very much in question right now. Famine was last declared in Somalia back about 6 years ago after an estimated 260,000 people died during a 2-month period. Wow. Somalia has multiple famines. That one happened not too long ago. And as usual, there was some aid, but largely the world watched as hundreds of thousands of people died. Now, here's a point that I want to return to in just a second. You need to understand that part of the problem in terms of relieving some of the suffering there is that organizations like Shabab, the terror group, blocks the roads, stops access to food aid, and steals food as well. That makes it far harder to solve the problem. We're gonna return to that in just a second, but I wanna round out some of these numbers to give you an idea of where these problems are and how big they are. So people at risk of starvation, in Yemen, there are more than 7 million people. Somalia has almost 3 million, South Sudan 5 million, and Nigeria 5.1 million as well. We're talking about a large section of the Earth's population, multiple cultures, but a common problem. Mostly starvation combined with drought, sometimes in war-torn areas, areas where the US has been involved, is still involved in some areas. But then there's also the children. Children suffering from malnutrition, the numbers are stark as well. In Yemen, almost 500,000 people, several hundred thousand in Somalia, hundreds of thousands in South Sudan, and almost 500,000 in Nigeria as well. And it's being covered. This famine, you can find articles on most sites. Jake Tapper actually talked about it on Sunday, but it's not sexy. It doesn't bring ratings, and so people don't focus on it. And so they might be exposed to the information, but then they go back to their everyday life.
Well, it's actually a tiny bit more complicated than that even, because there is some element of terrorism involved, like Al-Shabaab. Now, the media loves to talk about terrorism, and they talk about it even disproportionately to its actual impact. So, but a great example is within this story.
Yeah.
So imagine if a terrorist strike killed 260,000 people. It'd be the biggest event in world history. We would never stop talking about it. The famine kills 260,000 people back in 2011. Nobody even remembers.
Yeah.
All that never forget stuff? Not if it's a famine, then we forget immediately. So it's super disproportionate. But there is a terrorism angle here, but yet nobody's talking about it. Now, why is that? Because talking points don't arise out of thin air. They are manufactured and sent to the media. So if you want to start hostilities in a certain country, perhaps if they have a lot of natural resources, and some of these countries don't have much natural resources at all. Nigeria does, but not Somalia, not much in Sudan, not enough oil, right? So all of a sudden, oh my God, look at what is happening in Iraq, the humanitarian crisis there, Syria, crisis, this crisis, that crisis. North Korea, nah, we don't. I mean, they're kind of crazy. They already have nuclear weapons, as opposed to the Iraqis that were thinking about weapons of mass destruction. But let's not hype that up too much. Now they get press coverage because their leader is so crazy, right? But nobody's talking about invading North Korea. That's just not a thing that anybody talks about. These countries in Africa and the Gulf, shh. Now, not only is there nothing to go get there, hence the defense contractors never handed the guys in the media talking points, and that's why we never talked about it. Because if they wanted, they could hype up Al-Shabaab. Oh my God, Al-Shabaab! Because Al-Shabaab is a really nasty group. There's plenty to be fearful of there, and that you can rile people up over. They just chose not to rile you up over that Muslim terrorist group. Isn't that interesting? And then finally, Yemen, which is one of the biggest problem spots here. Well, part of what's causing the problem in Yemen is our ally Saudi Arabia, which is bombing the hell out of them, and then we can't, and nobody can get in medical aid, not because of Al-Shabaab, but because of Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
And they're our top allies, so shh.
And look, as we've covered in this story, there are a lot of things influencing this. Some of this is simply the reality of the area. Some of it is within our control. I mean, after all, it's not like the US isn't involved in these areas. We're involved in the fight against Boko Haram in some of these countries. But then there's also other things. I mean, we talk very, very often about global climate change and how it's the single greatest threat to the continuation of human civilization. But some people don't believe it because when the damage is done, they don't see it as having been climate change. But in some of these countries, they share basically one large lake in the center on the border, surrounded by arable, fertile land. That lake has been gradually getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And that is just one case study of the drought-induced civil war and famine that will come about as a result of global climate change. And it's not just going to be Africa, and it's not just going to be the Middle East. Already China is experiencing growing starvation and drought. They're proposing the world's largest water transportation pipeline to get water from thousands of miles north of a particular region of China because they can't grow food because the desert is expanding in that area. It's growing more and more dry over time. That is a trend that is only going to continue and perhaps accelerate in the future.
I'm just gonna add one last thing. So, if anybody in the mainstream media is watching this, they'll think, oh, you guys are nuts. There's nobody giving us talking points from Raytheon and Lockheed Martin to start wars, but not to talk about Al-Shabaab. Really? But I'm gonna ask you guys, think about it. Why were you talking about Iraq so much? And the humanitarian crisis in Iraq because of Saddam Hussein, the non-existent weapons of mass destruction. They did. The way that they handed you the talking point was Republican politicians would come out and go, look over here, this is the problem. And you're like, well, what can I do? Republicans say this, Democrats say that, I have to go cover it. And those guys are paid by their donors. Their donors are Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, et cetera.
Yeah.
And so, whereas Al-Shabaab, you could argue, is just as bad a terrorist group as any of them out there, including ISIS. And then, but no donor paid Republicans to go fearmonger about Al-Shabaab. So that talking point never went to the Republicans and hence never went on your air. So it's not that there's some cabal and you're in on it. It's that you're in a game and you don't even realize what game's being played.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I know we're out of time. Let's do one last story because it is super interesting.
Okay. Give me 1 second. Okay. The results of a new study might help provide a little bit of explanation as to why it is that so often in this country, police officers apparently overestimate the amount of threat posed by generally unarmed black males. Why is it that they see these people and think, I must use lethal force or my life is forfeited at that point? And also, in a larger sense, how we view the males of different races. So researchers asked nearly 1,000 online participants to judge the height, weight, muscularity, and strength of both black and white men based only on photos of their faces. So that's limited information to go on, but there is a little bit of information, and particularly salient information in America, considering our racial history and context. All participants in the survey, both white and black, consistently overestimated the measurements for black faces relative to white faces, even though the men pictured were all of similar size. There was no games being played with the size of the faces. The information is being provided from inside of the brain of the participant in the survey. In another experiment, participants were shown the exact same racially ambiguous body. When the person was labeled as black, participants thought he was taller and heavier than those who were told he was white. It is literally the exact same body, not even the apparent, the phenotypic race is being modified there. It's literally only the identification of the person's race. Now, as I said there, white and black similarly overestimated the size of these people. But a difference emerged when the researchers asked participants whether the person appeared threatening and if police force would hypothetically be justified if that person were a suspect. Only the white participants felt the perceived greater size of the black faces made them greater threats and more potentially deserving of force. So while black individuals in the survey also overestimated the size, they did not then think, as a result of that, police are justified in using force, potentially even lethal force.
So there's a couple of different factors at play here. So what we always talk about how discrimination and stereotypes are in all of our heads. So they're even in black folks' heads. So and this is not surprising. The study after study has borne this out. If you tell people that they are inferior, they begin to internalize it, which is of course slightly different. But you internalize a lot of the stereotypes that are out there, right or wrong. The famous blue eye, brown eye experiment in Kansas, all white kids, but we're told blue eyes are inferior or brown eyes are inferior. Not only do the superior eye race get all confident and do better in the tests, the inferior eyes, whether they're blue eyes or brown eyes, they switched, okay? Yeah. And immediately worked anyway. They start to think that they're inferior. So even black folks think that black guy is bigger than the white guy, even though they're the same size. And even mentioning the word black gets them to think bigger. But there is a difference though. Black folks think bigger, but they don't think danger, because why? Among the reasons why is because they live with other black people and they know day to day. There isn't like, oh my God, we're in constant danger. What if my aunt attacks me, right? Whereas a lot of white folks, of course, now in America have interaction with black people, but a lot of them don't. And if their interaction,
or far less, and different sorts.
Exactly, their interaction is smaller. They have a black friend at work, but they don't live maybe in a city or a portion of a city with a lot of African Americans. So to them, it seems foreign and an outsider or another is always perceived danger.
Right. Well, this goes to the history of America. There's a great documentary on Netflix called 13th out right now. And they tell the details that after the slaves were freed, that was a huge hit to the economy. So they had to basically put them in jail to work. And the government, the police, they made black people spooky and they made them very dangerous. And that's kind of where this, way before that, but where the notion that these people could be up to no good. I mean, a couple years ago, a black guy with a hoodie, Trayvon Martin, walking with Skittles. The way the media, conservative media, some media depicted it as he's beat George Zimmerman to within an inch of his life. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't even possible body type. Yeah. So it's systemic in police departments and just the way people think. And this president is also not helping.
So yeah, two things about what Jordan said. One, even more stark is the Tamir Rice case in Cleveland, where he was 12 years old, had a toy gun. They didn't even ask, they killed him in 2 seconds flat. But the cop thought that he was 24 years old. And by the way, another study shows that young black kids are considered by people who are seeing them as about 3 to 4 years older than the same age white kids.
Kids who are less than 10 years old in a lot of cases.
That's right.
Shift.
So blacks are perceived as bigger, stronger, older, and by white people as more dangerous. Now, if you've got that,
and also in that study, more responsible for their actions, because this is an older kid. They should know what they're doing, but they're not. They're younger.
And if you've got that thought in everybody's head, and that stereotype is set in. And it's also true of the cops. It's not that the cops are worse people, it's in all of our heads. But the cops have guns and they have authority. So what we should do is, instead of saying, oh no, all the cops are good, leave them alone, we should say, hey, maybe we could try to get that out of our heads so they don't disproportionately kill African Americans, which is true. That does happen significantly disproportionately. And how did it get in our heads? That's the other point that Jordan made that's so interesting. After slavery was over, the economy takes a hit, et cetera, and the propaganda begins. Because we need to replace that labor force, and there's many other factors, and oh my God, they're free, and remember, look at what we did to them, what if they do it back to us? And there's all this fear, and there's all this need at that point. So they start a systematic propaganda program, including the first feature-length film ever, Birth of a Nation, with a white guy dressed in blackface who would go around and grabbing all the white women and raping them, right? And so that is how the stereotype began, and that's why when people say, hey, this is, remember Jim Crow, remember slavery, the people go, oh, that doesn't matter, that was so long ago. No, unfortunately, it does matter. That's where it started, and it has rained down on us, and it's still affecting this whole culture, and hence leading to these results.
Do you remember we did a story, it might have been a year ago, I'm not entirely sure. It was after one of the unnecessary shootings of an unarmed black male, and the descriptions were out there. This is a thug, look how big they are, how scary they are. And so we went back and we showed newspaper clippings from the last 100 years of how they describe black assailants and crimes. And they used words like beastly and massive, a giant of a man. That's been going on for a long time. And so it's partially them reflecting the prejudices they had, and it partially serves the purpose of propagandizing, telling people that these are not the same humans as other humans. They're larger, scary, dangerous people. And one of the reasons I was so glad to cover this, political psychology is the area of academia that I come from. I miss it a lot. Because everybody needs to read more political psychology, because if you understand the way the human brain filters information, how it tries to make sense of a complicated world, you can understand how we get police brutality, how we get bills based on policies that have been shown time and time again to not actually function the way they're supposed to. So it's always a pleasure to cover a little bit of this.
I'll just add real quick, expanding beyond just African Americans, having covered Standing Rock, as many times, if you breathe near a police officer in this country, the deference goes to them. If they say, oh, we were under threat, this and that. I mean, some of the shit I saw out there was straight out of a dystopian horror flick. So the Native Americans, whatever the minority, even white people, until that psychology that you're not criticizing all police officers, but you cannot give them carte blanche to do whatever they want. I mean, we're going to continue having this.
Yeah, of course the correct answer is, it's not all police officers, and at the same time, we should hold our public officials accountable. It's not that complicated. And you want to talk about negative stereotypes. After, in this country, the Native Americans were butchered and massacred and given diseases and almost wiped out, then we called them savages.
Yeah.
So, and that's still with us today. So there's a lot of work to do, and the way we do it, by the way, is to educate each other, right? And try to get that crap out of all of our heads, because it isn't true. Okay, all right, so in the post game, what's the story that I got wrong? If it was a really serious story, I'd tell you now, okay? But it was
or not admit to it.
Oh, right, or did hide it, right? It's a fun little story. I'll tell you how I got it wrong, why I got it wrong, and then the deep state. What is it? Does it exist? Okay, and what does it mean? So that should be a really interesting conversation. So members get the post games. That's tytnetwork.com/join to become a member. All right, bye-bye.